Okay, so I want to kind of make a very brief summary of the previous session, kind of again focus on basically what was our initial premise and what we are going to achieve. So basically, in the previous session, I talked about, that the project of rationality, in the sense that we defined, reason. Its task is to basically unbind the architecture of reason by amplifying its main basically orientations, its main trajectories, which of course these trajectories we define them as, in Hegelian terms, in terms of self-conception of human in the world and self-transformation according to that self-conception. Now, of course, these even the Hegelian terms, in fact, addresses the most perennial questions of philosophy. That basically the project of rationality and its architecture can be understood in terms of basically the most important question of philosophy: what to think and what to do. One emphasizing on basically the criteria of truth, and the other one is basically emphasizing on the criteria of goodness. And the means to achieve, insofar as neither truth nor goodness are given to us beforehand, and the path toward goodness and truth is an incremental, revisionary, and constructive one. The means toward these goals are defined by theoretical reasoning and practical reasoning in terms of the perennial landscape of philosophy. The theoretical both theoretical reasoning and practical reasoning have their specific know-hows, basically skills of manipulation, modification, construction, revision, so on and so forth. Now, the whole thing about Hegelian thesis is that basically how we can basically amplify the relation between self-conception and self-transformation in terms of amplification between know-hows of theoretical reasoning and know-hows of practical reasoning. Then we talked about that self-conception, which is the basically addresses the question of conception of human in the world, in this sense, from the perspective of theoretical reason, can be bifurcated to two branches, basically. One, the perspective of the human from the perspective of object uniformities of the world that characterize the world story, and one from the perspective of the manifest image, the conceptual activities that are socially undergirded. Now, what I'm going to talk about in this session is I'm going to talk about basically the self-conception of man from the perspective of these object uniformities in the sense of what the world is. Now, for this purpose, I'm going to mainly basically dedicate major chunk of this session to Cellar's identification and characterization of the scientific image. Now, this is a little bit strange because you see, manifest image, namely how we encounter ourselves in the world, or how we appear ourselves, how we identify ourselves in the world as how we appear to ourselves, which is a dimension of the manifest image. This idea of appearing as such comes first, and then the scientific definition comes after as an alternative that then allows to revise this how we appear to ourselves. Now, obviously, if I was going to follow the logical order, this session should have been dedicated to manifest image. But for reasons that I will argue and discuss in the next session, we are going to talk about the scientific image in this session. Just a warning beforehand, as probably you have guessed from the reading materials of this session, it is kind of a boring, to be very frank about it. It's a boring and probably even a turgid session, but nevertheless, it is required for us to understand what is exactly scientific image, then how this scientific image is tied to the manifest image, and then how they can subsequently be integrated into a coherent account of the human in the universe, which is a robust account of self-conception. Now, to this end, first I'm going to talk about how Celars basically tries to free the scientific image from the shackle of the manifest image. And then once we get a kind of an overall picture of what manifest and what scientific image consists in, then we proceed to just go over some of the basic criteria of basically what are the implications of the scientific image in understanding and acting on the world. I anticipate that probably this session will some of the discussions that I would like to present will basically drag on into the next session. So the next session would be the continuation of this session, and also the definition of the manifest image, and then fourth session, manifest image and the synoptic or stereoscopic fusion of these two images into a coherent whole. So let's begin. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see the image? I can't hear you at all.
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. Let me... Is it full screen for you, or can you just see part of it?
We can see it's like just it's got a bit of a frame around it, but I can see all of it.
Okay, let me just let me.
I don't know if you have the chat thing open on the side too, Reza, but you can also see if we respond to stuff in the thing on the chat side too without turning on volume.
Well, the thing is that if I make this full screen, then I won't see the chat. So if something goes wrong, you better
Better
yeah,
speak.
say something. Yeah. Stretch to fit. Okay. Now, if the connection goes off or something, just say something. Otherwise, I will be lecturing for myself.
All right, no problem.
Okay. There couldn't be an us without us encountering ourselves and conceiving this encounter as such into a recognition of not only who or what we are, but also where we have come from, where we are, which paths have led to where we are, and which paths we should choose. Conceiving the encounter, this human encountering himself in the world, conceiving the encounter is accordingly the basis for recognizing both the natural history and history as a sequence of self-constitutions. The conceptual awareness of oneself experiencing the world is a scaffolding for how to know oneself in the world and to change them respectively, namely how to change oneself and change basically reality of this world. Now, as I said, the emphasis of this session is to approach self-conception from the perspective of what the world is and how self-conception can be articulated in terms of and in relation to what the world is. Now, Sellars wants to basically what Sellars wants to do is to come up with with an image of the world that is not that is no longer basically confined to the manifest image of how we appear ourselves, how we appear to ourselves. To do so, basically, Sellars wants to sharpen the distinction between the scientific and the manifest images. Sharpening this distinction between basically what really the world is and how the world is appearing to us is actually a requirement for a non-trivial solution for resolving the clash of the images between the scientific and the manifest image, and respectively enabling a non-trivial self-conception of the human in the world. So the world, we have basically the potential for two images of the world. One as conceived, i.e. brought into conception in terms of the imperceptible, and one potentially conceived, i.e. brought to conception in terms of the perceptible. Perceptible in the sense that how the world is appearing to us or appears to us, and how, again, in terms of this appearance, how we take ourselves to be, namely self-conception from the perspective of the manifest image. or the manifest perceptible. Now, so again, Sellars wants to make sure that the distinction between these two is sharpened, because only by sharpening this distinction he can come up with a non-trivial solution for resolving the clash of the images, the scientific image, what science tells us how we are and how we appear to ourselves. And then again, this basically this sharpening of the distinction for that is required for the for resolving the clash of the images is basically again a stage for Sellars for arriving at a non-trivial self-conception of the human in the world, a robust self-conception that we talked about. Basically, self-conception both from the perspective of object uniformities that characterize the world, and self-conception from the perspective of basically manifest resources, such as conceptual activities or normative attitudes. Now, how Sellars wants to sharpen this distinction with having in mind what he has in what basically his goal is he approaches this problem of sharpening the distinction through the controversy between scientific realism and empiricism. So the controversy between scientific realism and empiricism should be understood in terms of sharpening the distinction between the scientific and the manifest image required for their subsequent non-trivial fusion. So he cannot arrive at this non-trivial fusion of two different images unless he makes sure that the scientific image is no longer confined and anchored in the manifest image. Now, the controversy between empiricism and scientific realism is basically the controversy between how scientific theories are reconstructed. Now, the reconstruction of scientific theories is not just a matter of philosophy. So this argument, this controversy between empiricism and scientific realism is not solely a philosophical argument that is only valid and important in philosophy and in philosophy of science. It's basically, as we talk about this later, it really influences in how scientists and engineers basically construct their models, and how they study, for example, complex systems in nature, emergence of complexities, structure, so on and so forth, by way of these models. So basically, this controversy really highlights two attitudes of how basically, structures and complexities in nature are approached and studied. And these approach, of course, as we will develop the argument according to Sellars, are two epistemological. Their difference is that they mark two different epistemological approaches. Now, so scientific theory, in this controversy between empiricism and scientific realism, scientific theory is divided to two poles. Now, any kind of scientific theory uses both, observations and theories regarding basically non-observable entities. But how they are aparted from one another, empiricism and scientific realism, is according to the primacy or the locus of their emphasis. Empiricism is distinguished by putting its emphasis on observable. And scientific realism is distinguished by putting its emphasis on the primacy of theoretical domain of the unobservable. Now, Sellars wants to extract and basically localize the scientific image within the scope of the scientific realism, for reasons that I'm going to discuss, basically rebuild Sellars' argument. Now, and so we have scientific realism and a standard empiricism. And this is the classical kind of empiricism, but of course, as we move forward, we show that what Sellars argues for in defense of scientific realism and the critique of empiricism also applies to more sophisticated forms of empiricism. A standard empiricism now is distinguished, basically is characterized by three levels. One is postulating a theory concerning a domain of the unobservable. These can be molecules, subatomic, levels, fields, atoms, so on and so forth. It depends on basically what you are studying and what kind of theory you are using, accepted theory you are using to study, for example, a phenomenon. So, first postulation of a theory concerning a domain of the unobservable. Then the assumption that behavior, that the phenomenon behaves according to the postulated theoretical laws. Then explanation and correction of the empirical law. What is empirical law? Empirical law, as we will talk about, are basically generalization of observations. So explanation and correction of the empirical law regarding the observable phenomena in terms of fundamental empirical principles. So, in short, classical empiricism consists of one, theories and their postulated theoretical laws concerning unobservable entities. T is, symbolizing theory, and Ti and Tj that have an if-then structure. Basically, allow this Ti to Tj is basically a generalization of it's postulated theoretical laws concerning unobservable entities, how basically they behave according to a theory, a concept-laden theory. So, classical empiricism consists of theories and their postulated theoretical laws concerning unobservable entities, as well as associative or correspondence rules between the postulated theoretical laws and their empirical observables. Ti for the postulated theory, and Oi is for empirical observable. So there is a correspondence, there is an interpretive association between empirical observable and the postulated theory. Now, this first level, theories and their postulated theoretical laws, as well as correspondence rules, explain empirical inductive regularities or law-like observational generalities of the kind that empirical observation OI, then empirical observation OJ. In short, the theories the theories at the theories and their postulated theoretical laws explain empirical laws. Empirical laws being understood as law-like observational generalities. Now, these empirical laws themselves explain particular empirical observations. These are basically empirical data. You know, for example, what you see by way of instruments, a stereoscope, you know, a microscope, so on and so forth. Now, the schema of empirical explanation, how basically, according to an empiricist, scientific explanation is done, is like this. Is like the diagram at the bottom of this page. So theories and their postulated theoretical laws concerning unobservable entities. This is important. These theories are usually concerning unobservable entities. Unobservable entities like molecules. And then, so these theories explain empirical laws or observational generalities. For example, this would be a temperature in gas or pressure in gas. According to these behavior of the molecules postulated in a theory. Now, observational generalizations or empirical laws then again explain the empirical data, what you actually observe via technical instruments. So in this explanatory schema, theory is an unexplained explainer. It explains observational generalization, namely empirical laws. And empirical laws are explained explainer. They are explained by theory, and they also explain empirical data or particular observations. Particular observations themselves are explained non-explainer. They don't explain anything. They are explained by empirical laws, which in turn are explained by theories and their postulated theoretical laws. Now, according to the empiricist, empirical laws are logically derivable from theories and their postulated theoretical laws concerning unobservable entities. So this is the explanatory schema that of a standard empiricism that Sellars shows empiricists agree to, and then Sellars wants to basically show that how what are exactly the flaws with the the explanatory scheme put forward by empiricism. So now the thing is that we see that between theories and their postulated theoretical laws concerning unobservables and empirical laws, there is an explanation. The theory explains the empirical law. But exactly how? How unexplained explainer of theory explains the explained explainer of observational generalization or empirical laws. Now, this how of the explanation is by way of the theories substantive correspondence rules, rules which associate the empirical state of the observable with the theoretically posited state of the unobservable. So substantive correspondence between empirical state. Empirical state is not the empirical data. Empirical state is the one that is used in basically generalization that allow to basically formulate an empirical law. So there's a correspondence between empirical state of the observable and the theoretically posited state of the unobservable. Now, this is one sense that theory explains. This is the way that theory explains observational generalizations or empirical laws. Now, the relation between theory and particular observations, namely empirical data, is very different. It's not a substantive correspondence. It's a methodological correspondence. So the relation, the association between the explanatory association between theory and empirical data, the data detected by way of technical devices, is a methodological follows methodological correspondence rules, which empirically detect the presence of an unobservable or single out the specific state of an observable. So what we are going to emphasize, and what Sellars is going to emphasize, is this relation between theory, qua unexplained explainer, and observational generalities which constitute empirical laws or explained explainer. And he shows that the relation between theory and empirical law is what needs to be focused on in the critique of empiricism, and basically this critique then for Sellars leads to defense of scientific realism and consequently extraction of the scientific image from the manifest image. So this is how Sellars is basically approaching this problem. So we are going to discuss the implications of this associative substantive map between postulated theories concerning the unobservable at the level of theory and empirical generalization at the level of observable states. Substantive correspondence symbolized by a two-way arrow between postulated theoretical unobservable TI and empirical observable OI, or more generally the relation between theories and observational generalizations which play the role of empirical laws suggest. So the following are basically the implicit and explicit assumptions and commitments of an empiricist approach to scientific explanation. 1. Delegating the unobservable to the interpretational capacity of postulated theories concerning the unobservable and their substantive correspondence with observational generalities concerning the perceptible. Now, this delegation, in effect, subsumes the unobservable within the manifest perceptible. This is important, which we come back to it later in terms of how Sellars approaches this subsumption of the unobservable within the manifest perceptible. with the perceptible belonging to the manifest image. You know, this how we appear, how things appear, perceived. 2, accentuating the observable as all that exists. Basically, the commitment of empiricists to inductive generalizations at the level of observable, and subsumption of the unobservable within the observable, within the manifest perceptible, accentuates or emphasizes that the observable is all that exists. Basically, regularities or laws are only conceived at level of the observable. So this is an implicit, basically, commitment of a standard empiricism, which, of course, for example, reductive empiricism, or more sophisticated forms of empiricism are actually accentuating this. They are making it explicit as basically that the observable for a scientific explanation is all that exists, and regularities or laws by which we explain phenomena are only conceived at the level of the observable. 3, the accentuating theories that go beyond possible sense experience, i.e. theories postulating unobservable entities. So accentuating the observable as all that exists basically is tantamount to de-accentuating theories that go beyond possible sense experience, meaning that they are beyond the manifest image of the manifest perceptible. The accentuating theories that go beyond possible sense experience by giving the unobservable entities only a calculational or instrumental role in generalization of the observables into empirical laws. So basically, postulated theoretical unobservables at the level of theory are only used for an empiricist as basically useful fictions or hypotheses. Their role is instrumental in basically generalizing the observables into empirical laws. So they do not really say, an empiricist can say, as for example, constructive empiricists suggest, the more sophisticated form of empiricist is that the empirical approach can even dispense with the real existence of the theoretical unobservables. Furthermore, non-observational theories do not need to literally refer to unobservable theoretical entities, since their task is to capture accurately the observational generalities based on particular observation. 4. Prioritizing the predictive role of empirical inductive procedural generalization to the extent that any theory that does its job in simplifying explanation, basically simplifying explanation is part of the scientific method, which is, can be characterized by Occam's razor, that we shouldn't multiply causes beyond the necessary. So prioritizing the predictive role of empirical inductive procedural generalizations to the extent that any theory that does its job in simplifying explanation and yielding a sufficient predictive valence, can do away with references to unobservable entities beyond the perceptible domain. This is important. So as long as empirical inductive generalizations or empirical laws do their job basically in simplifying explanation and having a predictive valence, then they can dispense with basically any sort of reference to unobservable entities that are beyond the manifest perceptible domain. That was, so the schema that we basically explained and we brought its implicit and explicit assumptions to the fore can be even recognized in more sophisticated forms of empiricisms. These more sophisticated forms of empiricisms or conciliatory empiricisms, they want to basically propose that the controversy between scientific realism, whose primacy is a theoretical postulation of unobservable entities, and empiricism, whose primacy is the theories of the observable, the dispute between the two is simply a pseudo dispute. Basically, it doesn't exist. So conciliatory, these more sophisticated forms of empiricisms, they want to reconcile the dispute between scientific, scientific realism and empiricism, to show that basically what is really important is the observational generalities or law-like empirical regularities, and the theories which postulate basically unobservable entities can be approached either in the framework of scientific realism or empiricism. So to recapitulate this and kind of elaborate it, is that conciliatory empiricism's defense is like this. What is important are observational generalizations of the kind OI, then OJ, and particular observations, namely empirical data. We can choose to interpret the theory either within an empiricist framework or a realist framework. So the difference between scientific realism and empiricism from the perspective of the conciliatory, more sophisticated empiricism is only a matter of different linguistic or conceptual frameworks. And this is something that, you know, put forward by Carnap and others. And is consequently relative, as long as the empiricist and realistic reconstructions of scientific theories abandon their demands for one coherent and comprehensive account of the structure of reality by virtue of both being relative descriptions. Both approaches are viable and justified. But Szilard's aim is, in fact, to come up with a coherent and comprehensive account of the structure of reality under the rubric of the scientific image. The third, claim of the conciliatory empiricist is that theoretical postulates concerning unobservable entities can be regarded as instrumental hypotheses or fictions. As I said, they play an instrumental role in observational generalizations or extraction of empirical laws. The goal of theory is to be empirically adequate in covering manifest observations. We accept adequate theories in the above sense as long as we prioritize our belief in ever more refined observational generalizations. Regardless of the theory concerning unobservable entities, the upshot is the improved manifest observational generalization. So basically, improving manifest observational generalizations or empirical laws is the center of the focus. And as long as the center of focus of either scientific realists or empiricists are this, then they are basically both adequate. Now, Salar's approached the conciliatory empiricism as a form of relativism, as a form of quietist pluralism that basically tries to simply reduce the difference between postulated theories of unobservables and theories of observables to a choice of linguistic framework or conceptual framework. But for Salar's, this is simply problematic. So Salar's then goes ahead and to basically shows that this conciliatory approach is flawed. And by detection of these flaws, then he proceeds to extract a scientific image that is no longer tethered to the manifest image. So, what is exactly scientific realism that Salar's tries to define is about? It can be captured by one of his, a quote from one of his texts, that scientific realism means having good reasons for espousing a theory which postulates the existence of unobservable entities is to have good reason for saying that these entities really exist. So in fact, scientific realism put its main emphasis on unobservable entities, processes and mechanisms, levels, hierarchies, and length scales, which basically tries to understand and study and model complex systems by way of these underlying unobservable domains. And this, as I attempt to argue at the end of the session and the beginning of the next session, leads to basically a proliferation of a landscape that is far more complex than the one that is suggested by the empiricist. And then the discovery of this landscape that is basically comprised of a swarm of unobservable, imperceptible entities requires completely fundamentally different approaches than the ones basically built on the empirical on the empiricist basically explanatory approaches. Sorry, 1 second. Mm, just to make sure, does anyone, I mean, everyone is getting the picture and the screen sharing.
We're seeing scientific realism's objection via Sellers.
Sorry?
We're seeing the screen, scientific realism's objection.
Yes, okay, good. So, Sellarsian scientific realism's objection can be elaborated and reconstructed in this fashion. Now, theory as a whole, first, I mean, it tries to, make explicit the implicit assumption of the empiricist, and then he tries to show that these implicit assumption of the empiricist explanatory approach are quite problematic. Theory as a whole has testable empirical consequences according to the substantive correspondence map between language of theory and language observation. Language of observation is the one that allows for generalization of basically observable states into empirical laws, and language of theory allows for postulation of theories regarding non-observable entities. The empiricist reconstruction of scientific theory reinscribes scientific theory within the manifest image, insofar as it is the complex system or multitude of invisible or imperceptible entities which orchestrate or organize the perception of the observables at the manifest image, at the level of the manifest. So basically, how empiricists approach the scientific theory is that basically it's reinscribe scientific explanation again within the resources of the manifest image. But as Sellars argues, and this will be elaborated a bit later, complex systems or multitudes or swarm of non-observable entities, imperceptible entities, orchestrate the perception of the observables at the level of the manifest perceptible. Now, there are two types, and this third one is the one that is important, and Sellars uses to basically extract scientific image via scientific realism and distinguish it from the empiricist reconstruction of scientific theory. There are two types of observational generalizations of the same observational evidence for a theory at a given time. Manifest observational generalization of the kind, a manifest observable state, then OI, then OJ. So this is what Sellars calls manifest observational generalizations. Manifest in the sense that they are drawn on the manifest perceptible. The other type of observational generalizations that are used to deduce empirical laws, to basically arrive at empirical laws, are theory-laden observational generalizations of the kind that the observational state that the scientists observe is basically contaminated with theory concerning the postulational theory concerning the existence of unobservable or imperceptible entities. So there are two types: manifest observational generalizations drawn on manifest perceptible, and theory-laden observational generalizations drawn on basically theory-laden observation generalizations, or theory-laden observations that are carried out within the framework of a theory concerning non-observable entities, like molecules, atoms, subatomics, fields, so on and so forth. Now, both manifest observation, OI, and theory-laden observation, namely observation contaminated with theory, are in fact perceptual observations. So they are both genuinely perceptual observations, which is to say they are reliable, non-inferential classificatory responses to an object. But the difference is that one is infused or laden with concepts of the theory, and the other is basically on the basis of the manifest perceptible. Now, the difference between theory-laden observation, which the scientist has in her observations, and the manifest observation, which the empiricist accentuates, can be explained via a visual example. So the difference between a theory-laden observation and manifest observation that empiricist tries to centralize in his account of basically reconstruction of scientific theory can be somehow clarified via two visual examples of what is exactly these two form of observations regard or approach an object. The theory-laden observation is like seeing the object as. Seeing as, namely the kind of thing what we see the object to be. For example, the theory-laden observation of electrons in a cloud chamber can be characterized in the sense of seeing the object as, seeing an electron as doing such and such. The electron is observed as you see, as a streak of droplets in a cloud chamber. Insofar as the scientist's observation of the manifest imperceptible is mediated by theoretical concepts. So seeing the object as is always mediated by a specification of the conceptual framework. For the scientist, seeing the object as is mediated by theoretical concepts regarding basically non-observable entities. Now, this allows the scientist to observe the electron without necessarily inferring from the more immediately perceptible, such as shape and color. So the way that the scientist sees the object as does not need to necessarily, even if it can, does not need to necessarily infer from immediately more imperceptible properties. namely manifest imperceptible. In other words, the scientist does not necessarily need to resort to manifest observations of the kind that empiricist centralizes in his account.
Can I ask a question about this?
Sure.
So I understand the distinction you're drawing, but I can't, when I'm trying to think of the seeing of this manifest image.
The seeing the seeing of is the manifest image.
Yeah. But I'm trying to map that to any kind of actual existence, and there's no such thing as like a pre-theoretic observation.
Yes. No, you see,
even if you were to simply capture the signals, for instance, coming from my eyeballs going to my brain.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Then this is what Sellars talks, that all observations are basically concept mediated, and this is what we will talk about now. All observations for Sellars are concept mediated, but there is a difference between the conceptual framework of seeing of and the conceptual framework of seeing the object as. And this is what really Sellars' main point of emphasis, which is highly actually sophisticated, and we won't go that much into it. But I want to make clear that both observations are concept mediated, are conceptual. Yes, this is in fact Sellars needs to emphasize this in order to dispense with the myth of the given, that all perceptual takings are concept mediated. But there is a difference between the kind of conceptual framework that they bear on their seeing of the object. Now, seeing of the object, and this is the way that the manifest is done at the level of the manifest perceptible. Seeing of the object, namely the type of observation that underlies manifest observation of the empiricist, is like seeing a cube being such and such in terms of shape and color. All we see of a physical object is its shaped and colored facing side, which are roughly the same for different observers. Since they are occurrent, sensible properties, this is important, they are occurrent, sensible properties of the object. However, what the observers see the object as, or what they see the object to be, is dependent on the concepts of causal properties that they bear on their perceptual experience. This will be elaborated further on. So the distinction between theory-laden observation and manifest observation is really can be exemplified in the distinction between seeing as and seeing of, in the sense as seeing as mediated by a specific conceptual framework, and seeing of also, again, mediated by concept, but is also based on occurrent sensible properties. And that's what specifies and gives it a very narrow conceptual framework. Accordingly, while the resources of the manifest observation, example seeing of, are constant, occurrent sensible properties, the resources of theory-laden observation, example seeing as, change. And for this reason, our classification of physical objects can become more complex. Now, we go to elaborate this a little bit. Something happened here. I seem to have lost my
your ability to switch screens?
Yes, let me, sorry.
You can go to, if you go to the iPad, just make sure that they're not connected anymore. with the airplay. Yep. You came back for a second.
Hmm. It doesn't change the page now.
Are you're changing the page currently
Yeah.
on the
Yes.
iPad? All right. Also, right now you kind of actually are having some difficulty with the microphone again. So
Okay. Okay. Let me just reconnect it so we can hopefully overcome this whole
yeah,
problem.
if you refresh, it might fix it quicker than trying
Okay.
this.
Okay. Mm,
Okay, I see you now.
now let me do the. The strangest thing is that okay, it came. Okay, let me. Mm,
What is strange to me is that the audio is distorted at the same time that you're having problems with your streaming your desktop from the iPad.
Oh,
So
I
routers.
mean, it's still this. The voice is still distorted.
No, it was just at the point that you were having the issues with the screen sharing. Both are working on your routers, so maybe something with that.
Yeah, man, I can't understand. It is on mirroring, and nevertheless, it's not coming up on the screen.
Okay, then restart Reflector then.
Okay, if this doesn't go, then I have to just talk about it without. Nope. Apparently, it's not coming up.
Okay, you don't have it as a PDF where you could share it with the group.
Oh yes, you're good. Yes. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
see if you see this on if you open the chat and you see the there's a Google Drive like looks like a recycle sign really, but in the
I
bottom
can
right hand.
do. I mean, I can easily do a screen sharing from here.
Oh yeah, duh. Yeah, that too.
Okay. Sorry for this. This is technical difficulties. Okay. Now. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Uh, scientific realism, objection via Salars accordingly, right?
Correct.
So, this. So, while the resources of the manifest observation, example seeing of, are constant, the resources of theory-laden observation change, and for this reason our classification of physical objects can become more complex. Now, the conceptual framework of manifest perceptibles as the locus of the empiricist emphasis is narrowly conceived, since the concepts pertaining to thing kinds and causal properties at this level are all built of concepts pertaining to the occurrent sensible properties of physical objects, which have limited resources for complex classifications. 3. No matter how much the nature and causal properties of our manifest observations, locus of empiricism, are changed or refined, they still belong to the phenomenologically colorful and vibrant world of physical objects and are confined to the manifest image. The theory manifest observation distinction of the empiricist, namely the theory concerning the postulated theories concerning non-observable entities and manifest observational generalizations, is at its base constant, since it is at its it's at its base constant between the domain of perceptible objects as conceived in the manifest image, marked by occurrent sensible properties, etc., as opposed to any domain of postulated theoretical entities that are imperceptible in the sense of not being manifest perceptible entities. This being conceived in the manifest image is basically what really limits the scope of conception that undergirds the observational generalization or extraction of empirical laws at the level of the manifest perceptible. Sorry. 4. The distinction between scientific realism and empiricism lies in the difference between two observational generalizations. Now, both of which cover the observational evidence for an accepted theory. So both are genuinely, and as we talked about, they are both genuinely perceptual. The difference between the two is marked by generalization of empirical data are conceptualized. The difference is marked by how generalization of empirical data are conceptualized. Manifest observational generalization are inductively supported by perceptual data, whereas observational generalization through sophisticated scientific theories are laden not simply and generally with concepts, since all observations are concept mediated after all, but emphatically they are laden with postulational theoretical concepts of entities that are not manifest perceptible. This brought back what we, the question and regarding that all basically our observations are concept mediated, but there's a difference between their conceptual frameworks. 5. Postulational theorizing tells us that objects conceived as being of manifest perceptible empirical kinds are ultimately not empirically lawful, as the empiricist claims them to be, unless they are reconceived as, again, as being categorically different empirical kinds of thing, that is, being identifiable with complex systems of non-manifest objects. The manifest observational regularities, accordingly, cannot be spontaneously explained by themselves, because their explainants, what explains them, are non-manifest. The violation of empirical laws, namely manifest observational generalizations, which is utilized, according to an empiricist, which is utilized according to the empiricists to refine the generalization of the observables, in fact points to the postulated theories of the non-observable in the sense of the reason as why and how the generalization is violated. So even the empiricists that we talked about, that the empiricist says that as long as these observational generalizations, manifest observational generalizations, are refined, then they can dispense with basically the resources concerning theoretical resources concerning non-observable entities. But this refinement cannot be done unless we detect basically where and when and how they are violated, or they maintain their lawfulness. None of these can be actually explained unless we resort to basically non-observable at the level of the non-manifest as the reasons behind these violations or maintaining lawfulness. Violation of the law or lawfulness as the ground for how we can improve further these observational generalizations. Lawfulness or the violation of the empirical generalization or empirical law is intrinsically tethered to how and what, namely the theoretical framework, to how and what observations are conceived as. Namely, again, resorting back to the postulated theories concerning non-observable entities. 6. The comparison between the manifest and concept-laden generalizations reveal that no matter how refined a generalization restricted to the manifest concept is, it is ultimately unstable or accidental in nature. The effectivity of the manifest generalization that the empiricist emphasizes is only a result of it being parasitic upon the concept-laden generalization. This was basically how Sellars tried to set his account of scientific realism, which points to the existence of non-observable entities, swarm of atoms, molecules, subatomic fields, so on and so forth, processes, patterns, underlying regularities. He set this account of scientific realism against the empirical account of scientific theory by showing that no matter how empiricists construct his explanatory schema, whether in the sense of the conservative sense of the positivist or the conciliatory sense that also affirms scientific realism at the level of conceptual framework or the constructive empiricists. These are all basically flawed at the level of their basically implicit assumptions. So Salar's, by making explicit these implicit assumptions of the empiricist, shows that the empiricist account of the scientific explanation is fundamentally within the manifest image. But the manifest image by itself is really accidental and unstable in nature and cannot really explain how it is conceived. This strategy, this Salar's objection against empiricism, then allowed Salar's to basically postulate existence of non-observable entities as basically what really constitutes the scientific image, namely the world story being told from the perspective of object uniformities at the level of non-manifest. How much time do we have? I mean, before questions, with questions being 45 minutes?
We have till 2 o'clock. Your Eastern Standard, so 2 o'clock Eastern Standard. So.
Okay. So now, this was, Salar's argument to sharpen the distinction between manifest image and the scientific image by way of approaching this sharpening through the controversy of scientific realism and empiricism. Now, so as there was this quote from Salar's, this Salarzian account of scientific realism anticipates, the emergence of models that they basically take into account the organization of non-observable entities. The non-observable entities, processes, patterns, mechanisms, length scales, things that are not manifest, play key role in scientific explanation and reconstruction of complex systems. We are going to, as I said, so basically the scientific image requires a different kind of modeling of complex natural phenomena than the one inspired and influenced by the empiricist account. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit about basically models, how models try to study, detect, measure, and reconstruct, these complex organizations that are not at the level of the manifest image. Sorry, they are not at the level of the manifest. To do so, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the basic premises of any kind of model, which is the question of the structure. And then I'm going to talk about a structure a little bit and how a structure, the framework of understanding a structure, is, redefined. And these are some of the ongoing debates, between various accounts of, this scientific realism and how it basically informs models of complex systems, whether in terms of a structural realism or different understanding of how we can basically study complex systems and the complexity of emergence in natural phenomena. Then the next session I will kind of bring a kind of a robust account of this modeling that takes into account some of these subtleties of scientific explanation and how we should approach basically scientific explanation, and how we should basically build our models according to a robust account of scientific explanation that is no longer tethered to the manifest. So, sorry, I mean, the slides about this object and structure, I have some of the slides, and then I couldn't really compose more slides, so I will just talk about them without having the slides. But we have the slides for the first 2 pages. Now, defining a structure is a key to observation of various phenomena, both at micro level and macro level. The question of a structure is tied to definition of the object, or what the object is. Moreover, detecting and measuring a structure is central to studying and reconstructing the emergence of complexity, i.e. how things are organized and how this organization results in the emergence of new properties, both structural and functional, at any kind of level. 2, studying the organization of complex systems, the interplay between various length scales, subatomic, atomic, molecular, crystal, cellular, etc., that leads to the emergence of new structures and functions, is performed by way of constructing models. In construction of models, scientists attempt to detect regularities in processes. For complex systems which are between order and randomness, this detection of regularities is difficult, since the ratio between noise and error, noise or error and signal, out of which regularities can be singled out, is strongly dependent on the architecture of the model and how the model represents the structure. Now, regularities in this sense are basically, the kind of law-like generalities that they can be. So regularities can be compressed into laws, and this notion of compression is very important, as I will discuss about it at the beginning of next session. So how basically these models try to study regularities is strongly tied to the architecture of the model itself, in the sense that how model distinguish between error and signal, and how it compresses this basically discernments into regularities, compresses them into regularities. With the understanding that these regularities, how it singles out regularities is also tied, is strongly tied to how it represents the structure. Now, generally, how structures are conceptualized and represented is very specific in the following sense. Now, the classical concept of a structure, by which classical models single out regularities and quantify emergence in complex systems, is defined in terms of identity, or more precisely by appeal to the law of identity. Identity of the structure in this sense is and should be a strict identity. Now, law of identity is, one of the laws of thought. Whatever is, is. For example, in Fregean sense, it is the sense that A equals to A is fixed. For example, we have a repertoire of symbols, a language, and we can these symbols can be anything, as long as we basically we stick to the rules of how the symbols make sense within basically in our collection. And once we fix the sense of these symbols, we need to basically stick to this to the identity, to this identity of the symbol. We cannot diverge from it. Whatever basically, so the fixed sense of the symbol in our repertoire of symbols, namely language, is a basically ground for reasoning, how we can reason out of this. And this is the law of identity, in a classical sense. Now, defining a structure in terms of identity allows for further definitions for conceptualization and examining structures. An immediate definition that comes out of this appeal to the law of identity is the definition of isomorphism. Two isomorphic structures are taken to be identical, according to this classical account of law of identity. Now, another immediate definition is defining the structure in terms of invariance. This is basically one of the fundamental concepts of physics, that structures are understood in terms of invariances. Basically, the whole debate around scientific realism is the distinguishing of objects in terms of their invariances. That objects are defined in terms of structures, and structures are basically distinguished and singled out by their invariance preservings, or namely invariant traits. So the second immediate definition is defining the structure in terms of invariance. Whatever is A equals to A implies that the fixed sense in which A is used. The invariant aspect of A is what constitutes the identity of A from a logical aspect, from a classical logical aspect of the law of identity. Now, the invariant properties are formalized usually by a mathematical field called group theory. Group theory, roughly speaking, studies symmetry and symmetry preservation or invariances. For example, a Rubik cube. You see, this symmetry, when we are talking about, is not just the kind of a strict Euclidean symmetries, but symmetry in the sense, for example, of a Rubik cube. Whatever all the combinations are symmetry preservings. So symmetry is the whole discussion around symmetry and symmetry preservings or invariance preservings is complex. It's in a trivial, for example, sense of invariance preserving is that those properties that are preserved under a certain transformation. But of course, as I said, this is just a trivial. We are not going to get into the details of, group theory and basically articulation of symmetry preservings under transformations. Now, so the structure is defined by appeal to identity. Identity basically sets for two definitions, one, understanding of a structure in terms of invariance, and a structure of and understanding of a structure in terms of isomorphic definitions, namely identicalities between structures. and invariances, as I said, are basically formalized by way of through group theory. Now the thing is that this is a kind of a classical way that classical models, and even today, majority of models, try to single out structures and detect a structure and study them. So, in fact, we see that there is a way that the objecthood of the mathematics basically informs the detection of object in physical domain. One of the recent, basically, developments in modelings is informed by the development of how we can change the conceptual framework for basically identifying object via its structure. I want to make a kind of like a kind of a wild metaphor for you to be able to understand the kind of a formal, the formal language that is at stake here, which is also technical. You see, okay, so the law of identity, we said the law of identity appeals, in its classical sense, allows for the definition of invariances and isomorphisms. Now, this new definition of mapping an object via the objective of mathematics, which informs a kind of a completely diverse form of models for understanding structures and measuring them, is that it tries to shows that we can preserve the strict sense of identity without resorting to the definition of invariances or isomorphisms in the sense of two isomorphic structures being identical, namely in the sense of identicality of the structures. Now, this is part of, comes under, one of the revolutionary, basically phases of contemporary mathematics, that starts with, MacLane and category theory, and goes to Alexander Grothendieck and William Lovere, topos theory. In this kind of complex mathematical framework, which we talked about a little bit in the previous session, the relation between objects of mathematics understood in terms of basically these decompositionable maps, different concatenation of arrows or orientations or pointers, morphisms, and how they can be basically composed to different maps or functors. Now the thing is that in this new approach for understanding the object, for studying the object, the isomorphy previously was thought to be basically A equals, for example, B is isomorphic to C, and these two, basically, according to their isomorphism, they are identical. Now, this new approach tries to explain isomorphism in terms of transformation. Now, for example, think of these two objects, A and B. Previously, isomorphism was understood as an identical relation between these two objects. Now, isomorphism is being understood as a transformation map. Now, a transformation map, in a very intuitive sense, is basically different concatenation of arrows and alternative addresses and pointers between these two objects. Isomorphism, to be precise, is an invertible transformation between two objects. Now, insofar as it is an, basically a transformation map, there are different identities types that can be basically singled out from this transformation map. The concatenation of these transformations, these addresses, these pointers between these two objects can be composed to types of addresses, to types of transformations. So this is leads to another basically revision of this classical schema of conceptual schema of how to approach structures and objects. It leads to redefinition of basically a structure, not in terms of invariance, which belong to groups, but in terms of basically in terms of transformations in the topological space. So in this sense, the object is no longer seen as basically as a in terms of a structure, with a structure being defined in terms of invariances, but the object is defined in terms of a system of identities or a groupoid of identities, with these identities basically giving a coherent account of basically the object. Now, as I said, I'm going to make a really wild popular culture example for you to kind of intuit this whole transformation. You see, this is like, okay, this is basically how category theory informed homotopy theory tries to basically re-understand or redefine objecthood in mathematics, and by way of which redefine how we can study and detect objects without any appeal to a structure as invariances. Okay, this example is that, you see, in the movie Bourne Identity, Jason Bourne is like an object in the categorical sense. He asks himself, who am I? Basically, he tries to account for the objecthood in terms of its identity. And every time he asks himself, who am I, or what am I, he basically needs to travel these roads, these concatenation of different cities and addresses. And each time he basically moves himself to these addresses, he finds basically new alternative addresses. And these new alternative addresses reveal new identity to who he really is. Basically, in the sense that this kind of agent that is understood in terms of these alternative addresses or these transformation maps results in a wobble, what Lovier calls a wobbles around identity. So as Jason Bourne basically moves through these different pointers and addresses, these different plots, his identity also wobbles in the sense that new identities, new types of identities are revealed. So this is a kind of a really wild conjecture, but nevertheless, it's a good way to intuit a very kind of a sophisticated technical way of understanding redefinition of object as basically groupoid of identities, as a system of identities, without any appeal to identity in the sense of a structure via invariances. Now, in this sense, identity is still a strict identity. You know, the proliferation of identity types of an object does not weaken the identity, but simply allows for a robust approach to a study, discover, detect basically objects in complex systems. Now, this is something that I will talk about in terms of how models invest on this, some of the more sophisticated models, specifically computational mechanics of the kind proposed by James Crutchfield and his associates, invest on this approach, on this map between objecthood in the sense of groupoid of identities and object as a system of identities, which is actually is very in tune with basically physical systems, and at the level of quantum mechanics, that objects, the identity of objects or objects transform as they change their bases. Basically, how the agent, in our example, how Jason Bourne changed his location in this map, in this transformation map, his identity basically also changes in this sense. And then the map of this identity, the transformation, the group, the type of these identities is basically constitute and reveal what he really is. So I will talk about this in terms of basically sophisticated models, especially sophisticated computational models that use the subtleties of the scientific realism, and also use, for example, some of the more sophisticated formalizations of logics and mathematics. For example, this understanding of object no longer as in terms of structures via invariances, but system of identities, or for example, and this hopefully address some of John's questions about the impact of diagonalization theorems on how we can basically extend the range of our engagement with complex systems in terms of detection of imperceptible, non-observable entities, in terms of how basically complexities arrive, how non-observable entities organize the swarm of molecules of atomic level, so on and so forth, are organized and create novel structures and novel functions. So this will be, I will try to briefly cover some of these models informed by scientific realism and these advances in logics and mathematics in the next session. But this session, which was the idea that what is exactly a manifest image, a scientific image, and why scientific image needs to be unshackled from the manifest. So we covered this. The next session would be elaboration of some of these examples concerning models influenced by the scientific image, and also the rest of it will be dedicated to basically what the manifest image is, and exactly why is that it is the manifest image needs to be understood as causally reducible and logically irreducible, which allows for us then in the fourth session to create a robust account of self-conception by way of fusing an unshackled scientific image and a causally reducible, logically reducible manifest image. So now we can have all the questions and stuff.
Yes, we have about like 30 minutes. We can go over time too.
Okay, we have a question from the Grand Rapids group.
Sure.
You want to say it now?
How does the word abstract
How does the word abstract
relate to non-observable?
relate to non-observables?
Abstract relate to non-observables? No, I mean, I think the word abstract needs, we need to come up with a parsimonious definition of abstract. Well, abstract can, of course, mean different things in terms of basically abstract in the sense of the classical philosophical sense, and in the sense of basically abstraction, in the sense that basically information are compressed to a new level, functional computational level. Now, which of course there are relations between the two. Now, non-observables, as Szilárd had it, non-observables of theory in fact point to the actual existence of non-observables as basically what explain are non-abstract, qua manifest, perceptible, basically observations. Now, so the relation between abstract and non-observable needs to be understood in the sense that, well, there are different senses, but one specific sense that we basically talked about is that the abstraction of non-observables within the theory are basically ways that these non-observables are postulated within a specific conceptual framework. Abstract in this sense is basically a specific compression or a specific basically systematization of the concepts of the unobservable. Now, are abstracts non-observable? Well, they can be, but what Szilárd is trying to say is that the abstraction of non-observables, namely the theoretical, the postulated theories of the non-observable, actually points to the existence of the non-observable. We talk about this a little bit, this whole concept of abstraction that also accounts for what really the abstract is in the beginning of the next session, when we are talking about basically understanding of abstraction in computational terms and understanding of how basically non-observables at the level of non-observable physical entities actually can account for abstraction of themselves, and how the abstraction again, via the manifest image, the abstraction of these non-observables is not simply a matter of the relation between the concepts of the language, but it also can be causally mapped to these non-observable entities. So this idea of abstract as basically a collection of concepts is abstract at two levels. And also needs to be understood at two levels. One, abstract in the level of basically it relates the rule-governed activities for concept deployment in a specific scientific theory, or basically it is conceived as an abstraction. But also how this abstraction actually is not purely restricted to intralinguistic rules, but also causally map via, for example, subatomic statements, and that's what we are talking about at the level of the manifest image, or what Sellars calls the theory of picturing, to actual non-observable or actual basically physical entities. So I want to make this kind of an open discussion, because if I feel that if I try to elaborate it, I make more confusions. I think we need to, and that would be the beginning of the next session, we need to define basically a really systematic theory of abstraction, or basically what really abstraction is, and what abstract entities are, and how they are related to these non-observables. And that's, we are doing it by way of, kind of a Crutchfield's computational theory, as well as Sellars' theory of picturing. So we can hold this this question until the next session, and also the last session, understanding of how basically what is exactly the relation between abstract at the level of, for example, a conceptual theory and the non-observable. It is not as simple as the classical distinction of the abstract versus the actual thing.
A small question here. You said the effectivity of the manifest generalization is, the manifest generalization is only effective because it's parasitic upon the conceptual laden scientific generalization, or the scientific image. Isn't the parasitism reverse? Isn't the theory parasitic upon the actual particular phenomena?
Yes. It's not parasitic, it covers it, because if it doesn't cover it, it doesn't become a theory at all. No, you see, as I said, and Sellars distinguishes that both manifest observational generalities and concept-laden observational generalities are in fact based on genuine perceptual takings, are in fact supposed to cover empirical data and empirical observations. But what is really manifest observational generalities are not really claimed that they are simply exactly like the concept-laden ones are covering the basically empirical data, which of course they both do. What they try to basically account for, and they claim to be true, is that one, the manifest observational generalities can dispense with the concept-laden observational generalities, which are the postulated theories concerning the non-observable entities. And second is that manifest observational generalities need to be distinguished from particular observations. These are two different levels of observations. What is particular data, observations O1, O2, O3, ON, empirical data, and the other one is the generalization, namely inductive basically procedure that is applied to these empirical data. So manifest observational generalization are not particular observations as such. They are inductive procedures applied to these observations. And what empiricists is trying to centralize, it wants to show the effectivity of inductive generalization of the particular data without basically without having a necessary link to basically postulated theoretical entities. So I think
that makes sense. I was confusing the manifest generalization with the particularist observation.
Yes. One is, these are two levels. We have level 1, theory, and is postulated theories concerning non-observable entities and their correspondence rules. This is the level of unexplained explainer. Then the second level is basically generalizations, observational generalizations. Then the third level is the particular data. The first level is the particular data, namely the empirical, basically testing and evidence and so on and so forth.
One unrelated question to the previous question, but a lot of the discussion of isomorphism was drawing off of the law of identity and the logics around that. How does this relate?
We said that this is the classical sense that the structures are defined, or objects are defined.
I'm just curious as to what does the effect of forms of logic that do not obey the law of non-contradiction, how do those relate to this?
Well, I mean, this is a complex question, and this is, yes, they are related. This exactly in the non-classical sense of identity, and that would be, at the level of topological continuities. And this is one of the fundamental insights of Peirce, at the level of for example, geometrical generalities or topological spaces that basically allow for this proliferation of types for an object, understanding of types of identity. At this level, yes, the law of non-contradiction are suspended for different levels of identities. This is yes, okay. This is, I think, this needs a whole lot of elaboration. I will try to make a kind of a little bit more comment on the classroom page. But yes, these laws of non-contradiction is partially suspended at this level. Partially suspended, yes, because we are talking about here about a definition of identity by way of basically topological connections. And this is how Peirce tries to show that, once you really understand logic in terms of these kinds of topological space at the level of continuity rather than discrete logical operations or logical axioms, then these basic laws of thoughts are partially suspended according to, for example, the level that you are referring to. Is a particular level or general level, so on and so forth.
I think you just answered my question. I was just going to ask if this has to do with the level of generalization.
Sorry?
I was going to ask if this has to do with the level of generalization upon which one is working.
The what regarding generalization?
Sorry, level of generalization.
Uh-huh.
I was just asking if this has to do, like, that sort of non-contradictory principle, if depending on the level of generalization one is operating on. I mean, I guess there's one.
Well, no, I mean, generalization of the kind that Peirce talks about are not specifically generalization that we were talking about in terms of observational generalities. Observational generalities basically are kind of inductive generalizations. Whereas generalities that Peirce tries to talk about are basically more of the genericities. You know, they are basically they can be, as Peirce tries to articulate, they can be mapped by way of you know, the difference between local and global, particularity, generality, genericity as specificity, super multitudinous, and you know, discreteness, exactness, vagueness, and generality. These are different, I think, concepts of generality. And what we were talking about in terms of empiricism are generalization in terms of inductive generalizations of the kind that basically they are required, but also basically positivism tries to overemphasize at the level of, for example, positivist empiricist tries to emphasize at the level of those manifest observational generalities. Now, Peirce's, I hope to talk about Peirce and how basically Peirce lays some of these fundamentals of, you know, understanding of basically objecthood in mathematics, and how this objecthood in mathematics can basically inform our modeling of objects, namely detecting you know, the regularities, complexities, emergent properties, so on and so forth. In terms of basically this oscillation between particularities of generalities, in the sense of a topological, basically a space that allows for these oscillations that you know, a map of addresses, exactly like this set of pointers, can go toward becoming more analytic, more discrete, exact map, where basically the laws of identity is more of a classical sense, where basically you have the law of non-contradiction, so on and so forth, and you know, toward more general sense of these maps of transformations, creating the kind of general landscape in which some of these laws of identities are partially suspended according to a level of generalization. And this level of generalization meaning, for example, transformation from point to neighborhood to, for example, a topological base, so on and so forth. Or, for example, in Peircean sense, between firstness, secondness, thirdness, the point, the vague neighborhood, the fuzzy possibility that are surrounded, and, for example, the generic landscape that basically in which the point is immersed, the topological space. These are, I think, yes, because I would say that if I try to explain some of these, I will totally diverge from the you know, the aim of the classroom. But yes, okay, I will talk about this a little bit on the classroom page in terms of the suspension of laws of partial suspensions of laws of thought according to the levels of generalization, or basically this transversal movements between, you know, the local object and the global topological space, or in Peircean logic between particularity, exactness, vagueness, and generality. Questions?
Well, actually, it's something in regards to the reading. I guess it wasn't maybe totally clear on exactly what I thought was the. Was it the entire Sosa book we were supposed to go through, or just?
Oh no, sorry. I mean, I thought that I thought I told Tony only the first 25 pages. You apparently have gone into depths of boringness.
Well, sorry about that, but yeah, actually, it was. No,
Actually, next we are going to talk about this actually about Sosa and why I talked about, recommended this specific part. We are talking about it in terms of some of the things about the manifest image and the epistemological implications of the manifest.
He seems, I mean, because I got through part 2 of that book actually, which I guess is a little bit further ahead, but he seems like he's attempting to defend foundationalism, and I was curious, I guess, by how he noted, like in terms of his accounts of extrinsity and intrinsity, he doesn't accept. He's kind of agnostic towards Sellars' naturalism. It seems like in his sort of account, at least thus far. I mean, without having gone all the way through to.
Yes. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. No. Yes. I mean, but you see, I think Sellars. You see, first of all, Sellars, even so many of these critics of Sellars are really don't understand the significance of what Sellars calls the synoptic image. Sellars, majority of especially content philosophers or even analytic philosophers treat Sellars as a full-blooded naturalist philosopher. And for that sense, also a scientistic philosopher. But the thing with Sellars is that Sellars' ultimate aim, which he also identifies his aims as the quest of philosophy, or the quest of self-conception, is really coming up with naturalism, what James O'Shea calls a naturalism with a normative turn. And that's exactly what the significance of synoptic image is. One, a scientific image unshackled from the biases of the manifest, and a manifest image that, even though it is causally reducible to its scientific explanation, is logically irreducible. And then the stereoscopic coherence between the two yield naturally a naturalism with a normative turn, which basically allows for a robust self-conception.
No, I found it interesting because without accepting, I mean, especially in his account of extrinsicity, which Sellars really gets into in his sort of account of the Raelians, it seemed like he wasn't able to explain, without accepting sort of the naturalism of Sellars and how, I guess, the material constraints of the scientific image inform the psychology of the manifest image. He wasn't able to explain the conditions of intrinsic, like psychological errors, I guess, in a way that seems like in Sellars really fits together fairly neatly. And so he was waffling between, others like non-naturalistic explanations and other perhaps more armchair explanations of psychology. And so he's not able to kind of fit together this sort of extrinsic and intrinsic accounts in the way that maybe Sellars is able to with the Raelians. And so he must rely on sort of foundationalism.
Yes. No, I will talk about at least some of the first things that Sosa tries to address, which are fairly classical. I mean, I just wanted to make because it kind of covers this in a fairly classical way and kind of coherent way. One, why is that the empiricist is problematic, and why is that the fundamental rationalist approach is axiomatic rationalist is problematic, and basically what kind of alternatives we can come up outside of the bipolarity of these two. And basically, what Celars is really is, Celars. Celars is a kind of a syncretic reconciliatory philosopher in the tradition of Peirce. He synthesizes seemingly, allegedly diametric, basically, oppositions. And through this synthesization, he brings into the fore basically flaws of these poles, and also corrects them in the sense that they can be synthesized, they can be conjoined to one another. And this is the same thing for the rationalism, empiricism, scientific realism, manifest image, scientific image, so on and so forth.
One other question. You go ahead, Jordan.
I was just going to say, sometimes you have, and this is particularly true if you get into physics, theoretical physics, and some of those scientific domains where sometimes you have competing scientific images that may or may not, they all seem to be isomorphic to the manifest generalizations, but they aren't to each other necessarily. And so sometimes you have this kind of incommensurability between these competing models where you don't actually know where to place your bets or whether any of them is in fact.
Yeah.
And then sometimes later, and I'll give string theory, now M theory as an example, sometimes later you will actually find an isomorphism between them, but sometimes you won't.
Yes, no, absolutely. No, this comes to the understanding that basically these theories are languages, and languages are. I will talk about this a little bit, not fully response to your question or comment. Celars addresses this in terms of theory of picturing. Theory of picturing is basically tries to is a language, is a theory of meaning. Now Celars has there are two main theories of language. One is the representational, and one is the coherist one. The representational is the one that there is a direct correlation between linguistic object and non-linguistic object. And the coherist one is the one that is about the relevance and the power of assertability in an inferential network, namely transits within the language. Coherist account, for the coherist account, assertability needs to be addressed, and meaning also needs to be addressed in terms of how it is deployed within the rules of the said language. Like for example, Wittgensteinian account, semantic holism, and so on and so forth. Now, the thing is that Celars.
Reza, 1 second. Sorry. For me, I'm getting feedback again on your microphone.
Should I refresh?
Probably. I mean, probably. I don't know if it's the driver that you're using on USB causing the feedback or the Wi-Fi, but I'm getting like.
I think it's more Wi-Fi because let me just refresh it.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yep, that clears it up.
Okay, so Celars try to basically show to reconcile the representational theories of meaning and the coherist accounts of meanings. Now the thing is that this is because if it is all about coherism of, for example, a language or a conceptual framework, these competing theories are basically languages. if is coherism, then there is no criteria of which one exactly is the best for addressing, for example, the structure of an object or studying these complexities. Basically, the question of the which one is better is again delegated to the internal, basically, transitions of the said language, the rules of the said language, which doesn't account for which one is again better. Everything becomes self-referential at this point. Now, Sellars tries to address this question of which one is better among these languages by way of showing that language is the theory of meaning, namely, is not all about basically coherent accounts within the framework of a language or a conceptual framework, but also in how this language at some basic level makes a causal map to the actual object. This is now, of course, Sellars doesn't make any kind of criteria for understanding which one is exactly, when we are talking about scientific theories, which one is better. But obviously, we need to understand these competing theories also, not also in terms of which one is better in understanding the structure, but also understanding the multitude of these competing theories as basically a unified theoretical framework that allows for diversification of basically detecting, measuring, singling out structures at different levels. Now, so one of the criteria is that a language or a conceptual theoretical framework that refuses to be unified with other languages, with other competing theories at different levels, then obviously that's the point that basically we need to bring into focus and study and to see if this language there's something problematic with this language, or there is something problematic with the other competing theories that try to generalize, they can be unified. So I think this is something that, yes, this is something that is quite a debate and a controversy.
Well, I think in a slightly more modest sense, you get the kind of coherentism and epistemology that, for instance, I don't remember where this was cited, but I remember reading Bruno Latour talking about creationism, and the way he approached arguing against creationism was not to deny its truth, but to say, creationism has not only to convince other people, it also has to convince the fossil record. It also has to convince.
Yes, and that's yes. As we talked about, any kind of scientific theory needs to cover, and that was both the empiricist and the scientific realist account, needs to cover adequately, according to their given theory, observational, basically particular observations. And this is really, as you say, this is the evidence. It's the level of the evidence that also, yes, can be used as a criteria. But of course, for certain competing scientific theories, the level of evidence is so scanty that we cannot simply rely on the evidence anymore.
Or you have all available evidence, but the evidence gathering process, Feyerabend, I think, talks about this in Against Method, where he talks about sometimes the acquisition of evidence is necessarily theory tainted in some domains, where you have to have the theory to acquire the evidence.
Yeah, it's always theory laden. Now it's the matter of how much it is contaminated with theory. Mm-hmm. And exactly what kind of theory. that's what's Sellars was talking about. That all observations are concept mediated, but it's a matter of what kind of conceptual framework we are dealing with, and whether this conceptual framework is in the confine of the manifest or outside of it.
Would this tie in at all with Chatelet's notion of gesture and sort of this idea of when he talks about like fog, how when you uncover one fog, it just sort of moves somewhere else, and you have to sort of
yes, pointers are gestures basically. Yes, absolutely. I mean, Chatelet, in the stake of the mobile, that figuring a space, translate as figuring a space, it basically tries to, it gives actually, without relying on category theory or any of these things, he tries to show that basically the anticipation of modern sciences and the new modern epistemological accounts are at their base gestural, not only in the sense of embodied gesture, but also formalized gesture, in the sense that, for example, he talks about Nicole Orim, the understanding that, for example, the construction of of knowledge in this epistemic sense is a matter of construction of a horizon by different orientations. These different orientations can be determined either by the position of the observer in the Kantian classical sense, or actually in the sense of basically gestures related to a spatial construct, to the formalizations of a space, figures of a space. Now, how these gestures are organized, how these pointers are organized, basically creates a coherent horizon. This is, yes, I mean, Chatelet's point of emphasis is, of course, very different, from the stuff that we were talking about in terms of category theory, homotopy theory, but yes, they all basically gestural in the sense, either the gestural in the sense of embodied gesture, or gesture in terms of geometrical gestures, in the sense of topological gestures. Gestures are themselves need to be understood as operative, basically, orientations. Operative, basically, understanding of a form of a space, in a philosophical sense, that is parametrized by the domain in which it is immersed. This is like a metaphor of, for example, this relation that any pointer, any gesture in the sense of category theory is exactly like a snail carrying its shell. The snail is being the arrow, and the shell is the spatial parametrics, those parameterizing basically properties of the domain in which that pointer is traversing. And the same thing for Chatelet. For Chatelet, basically, knowledge is constituted, the horizon of knowledge is constituted by these geometrical, basically, gestures that are either decided by how a space is organized, or decided by how the observer is orienting toward, a specific space, so on and so forth. Which we talked about, this idea of, the project of geometrization of knowledge, that so many of these new advances in developments in mathematics are really can be traced back to philosophical questions regarding the project of geometrization of knowledge. What is exactly geometry? How geometry can formalize the figures of a space? How figures of a space basically can be proliferated, diversified, synthesized, analyzed, so on and so forth. Another thing is that, you see, for Châtelet, and this is also, as I said, it's really the understanding of, one of the fundaments of basically modern knowledge is that intelligibility of a physical phenomena can be articulated via how the space of, for example, this physical phenomena is organized. And this is really at the center of geometry. Geometry organizes space, and by virtue of how it organizes space, it yields different articulation of intelligibility. For example, an example of how this works. For example, the intelligibility of fluids, of how a system of fluids work. You introduce a virtual observer into this. It's basically it's a daemon, it's like a Maxwell daemon. You put it in the you insert it in this fluid basically system. Then you see this act of insertion of a virtual observer, an operator, inside this fluid mechanics is not neutral. The act of observation is never neutral, whether it is the embodied observation or observation at this level of basically virtual mathematical entities. Once you introduce it, the fluid reacts. And then it's like this understanding that you have, by inserting this virtual observer into this system, you have created a cutout. You have created basically a hollow point in this system. Now, how forces express themselves with regard, or how forces press themselves against this cutout, which is the locus of your virtual observer, basically express the intelligibility of the behavior of the system within this fluid system. This, now, how basically this becomes part of the Cauchy residual theorem, that how you organize how these forces can be spatially configured along an integral path. The integral path being, the border of this cutout, namely the house or the locus of this virtual observer. The way that you can articulate it differently, basically you can have different articulations of how the system of fluid behaves. This is interesting that you see the organization of a space around this virtual cutout basically becomes a ground for the articulation of how forces of a physical systems express themselves, namely how they behave. You can render it intelligible by way of organizing a space. For Cauchy integrals is that how you can find integral paths along this virtual cutout. How basically traction forces and other forces basically express themselves, press themselves against this virtual cutout. Questions? Everyone is silent. Have I lost the audio?
No, no, we can hear you. I think the seminar might be running down. It's 2:15, so it's a lot of information.
What would you like the focus of this coming week's paper to be?
Oh yes, the assignment. Okay, to be honest, I haven't thought about the assignment. I'm going to think about it and post it on the classroom page.
I guess another question would be just to have a refresher what the exact pages that you want for the next reading, for next week.
The next reading, I think, I assume that you have read that Sosa paper, the first 25 pages, but also it would be great if you read that synoptic vision from James O'Shea's book.
Okay.
So next session is starting with some of these models drawn on, informed by, these advances in how basically we map, we detect objects, structures at the level of the non-manifest, and also also they are informed by the subtleties of the scientific realism, namely postulational theories concerning the non-observables. I will talk about those, and then I move to manifest image, and then the final session would be a little bit of manifest image and how basically why and how we can fuse these two images to basically come up with a robust account of self-conception of man in the universe.
One final question, I guess, about class stuff, too. How do you prefer to receive the assignments?
I said whatever you feel comfortable with. If you don't want other people to see it, just email it to me. If you want that other people also comment, other than me, just on the classroom page. I'm fine with both.
Okay. Good. Thanks.
Welcome. Thank you, everyone, and sorry for the extra boring session.
No, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.